Hey guys, welcome back to Learning 3D. This is our very last chapter of Learning 3D. Basically wrap things up, give you a little bit of a wrap up of what we talked about over the last few chapters. And I have my cheat sheet right here. There's a lot of chapters to talk about, but I'm going to kind of make it brief. For all of you that actually watched all these episodes, I know some of you kind of did it because you wanted to watch it, but you really were not up to that level yet. Just go back and rewatch it. As you guys know, you have 3 downloads with us. So just go back to SmackTalkrc.com, log in and download it again if you can't find it in your computer, and watch it again. Basically, this was done in such way so that if you actually would have watched these episodes one by one and you would have actually practiced the way I told you to practice, by now you should be comfortable with everything that I explained on all the Learning 3D chapters. You might not be at the point where you've perfected every one of those, but you should have been at the point where you can actually do them all and do them comfortably. If you can't, just go back. The most important thing here is that the way in which I've put these chapters together, it has a logical progression. Like if it, like I explained so many times in the past, if you are, for example, not comfortable with like backwards inverted flying, don't even try to do like a snake, because it's just not going to work. You might learn the stick movements and get through it, but it's just not going to look good. If you get in trouble, you're going to crash, and it's just not worth it. Just make sure you learn your basics first, and once you get those basics, move on. So for example, if you want to learn piro flips, learn the pirouette. That is something that I stress very much. If you want to learn 4-point tic-tocs, of course you got to learn tic-tocs first. If you want to learn piro flips after you learn the pirouette, you have to learn half piro flips first. It's sort of the logical thing to do. And every single maneuver, every single thing you try to learn sort of is, you have to build up to that point before you can actually attempt it. And again, going through these chapters, like for example, of course, the number 1 I explain everything about the basics, where I really tell you what you need to focus on at the very beginning, and then it sort of keeps going and it goes into flips and hurricanes and then funnels. And I'm explaining hurricanes and funnels because I already explained backwards flying, inverted backwards, and inverted forward flying. So I'm assuming that you have that basic foundation to do number 2. If you just download number 2 and try to learn to do flips, hurricanes, and funnels, you're not going to learn a funnel or a hurricane if you haven't mastered what's in number 1. And again, each one of these chapters, like for example, rolling circles, chapter 6. If you don't know how to roll, you're not going to be able to do a rolling circle. So if you refer to the chapters that are prior to that, that's going to help you learn the rolling circles. And again, everything builds up on one another, and it's a logical progression. Now there's a lot more maneuvers than what I explained on the basic 11 chapters of Learning 3D. There's a lot of advanced stuff out there. There's belly in, tick-tocking maneuvers instead of disc in. There's, all kinds of like pirouetting maneuvers. For example, 3D Masters, for their Masters category, has, every year they have new maneuvers. They're very complex. None of them are really covered here. But they build on the basic foundations of what I taught you in these 11 chapters. So if you master these, it should open the door to learning all those. So what we're going to do today is, we received a lot of requests from people saying that we never really covered pirouetting. And I believe that I did, but I'm going to give you some more tips on pirouetting, just basic right side up and upside down stationary pirouetting. Just going to talk about that briefly for a few minutes. Then I'm going to go ahead and show you how these maneuvers build onto the next maneuver. So I'm going to kind of show you the relationship that I was just talking about why it is so important that you learn this chapter before you move on. And then we're going to wrap it up by actually showing you some practice tips. I'm going to tell you where I see the mistakes, why people are not progressing as quickly as they could, and what I personally recommend that you guys do to actually see some progress in your flying. I get all kinds of requests from people that say, well, I practice all this stuff and I never really get ahead. I practice in the simulator and I really never get ahead. I'm going to tell you why. So let's go ahead. This is the last chapter, chapter 12 of Learning 3D. Here we go. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and fly this thing real quick here, and I'm gonna give you some pointers and basically kind of give you again sort of an overview of what we talked about in the past. And this time I'm just gonna basically emphasize on the importance of learning the natural progression of things, how things progress or how they built into one another. So I got my Goblin 630 here. All right, so let's recap a little bit. I taught you basics. So backwards flying, like that way, okay? For example, or anyway. If you don't know how to do this, you're not comfortable with this kind of flying, like just basic backwards flying, then you wouldn't be able to like do a transition like this, which you would have to do a snake. So again, why try a snake if you can't fly backwards? That's kind of dumb, right? I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. Going into like the pirouetting, if you couldn't pirouette like this, like right side up, and like this, like upside down, and hold it in one spot like this, then why venture into doing these piro flips? Like you would totally lose control of the helicopter like right away. You need to master this. Upside down pirouetting in one spot, and right side up pirouetting in one spot. That's another important thing right there. So everything kind of builds into one another. You know, again, we're going back to backwards. This is backwards inverted. You know, if you can't do this or do it like even in that direction, then you would never be able to do like a funnel, like an inverted funnel like this. So if you start trying to do a funnel like this and you can't fly backwards, invert it, you won't be able to do it. Simple. And everything else kind of builds up on one another. So like, you know, basic rolls. You know, if you can't do stationary rolls, you would never be able to like, or even if you can't do stationary rolls and start moving the helicopter, say forward, and then move the helicopter like back, then you would never be able to do a rolling circle, because a rolling circle builds on that. See, as you start rolling, as you continue to roll, you start making your corrections like we talked on the rolling circle episode, and you complete your ugly looking rolling circle. So everything, again, everything builds into one another. Sideways flying, nose in flying, if you can't do that, you won't be able to do certain maneuvers like certain pirouetting loops, for example. If you can't fly, for example, like say, if you can't fly, say, for example, tail towards you, and then you try to do like a pirouetting loop like away and towards you, then when you get to this orientation here, you'd be screwed. So you need to know like all those orientations. Same with like nose towards you, you know? That will help you again with pirouetting loops away and towards you, because you'll be in control all the time. If you can't fly inverted backwards, right to left, you would never be able to do like a pirouetting loop going that way. You'd get really confused and you'd get in trouble. But if you master this orientation, you'd be okay. Same with backwards inverted, from the left to the right. I mean, all these things build on one another. Like, there's absolutely no way that you can get rid of learning those fundamental or those foundations before you move forward. You know, half piro flips. If you don't know half piro flips, there's a lot of transitions you wouldn't know how to do. Just basic pirouetting transitions like these. You know, pirouetting funnels or pirouetting Mobius like I'm doing right now. If you don't know how to do a full pirouetting funnel like this, right side up and upside down like I taught you before, then you would never be able to do a pirouetting Mobius, because you need to know that orientation and this orientation right here to be able to do it. So a lot of things to think about, and this is basically the reason for these last 4 minutes and this little flight demonstration was mainly to show you and stress the importance of learning these things in a natural progression. Don't skip ahead. Just learn what you need to learn before you're ready to move forward. One thing that I think, according to you guys, we missed was talking a little bit about pirouetting, stationary pirouetting. I think I covered this when we were talking about pirouetting flips in the very beginning of the pirouetting flips episode. I talked about it very briefly, but I'm going to give you some tips. Nothing to it. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes here talking about pirouetting. So I'm going to go into my low head speed. And the first thing that you got to know before you start pirouetting, obviously, is to be able to fly in all four different, to be able to hover in all four different orientations. Let's see if I can go lower head speed. There we go. So basically make sure you master this orientation right here. Tail to the right. You've mastered this orientation right here, nose in. This orientation, tail to the left. And of course, you already know how to do your tail in. So as you start pirouetting, you know, I get a lot of questions. How many times, you know, when do I make my corrections? It depends on the pirouetting speed. Now, my helicopter here is very sensitive, and I wish I would have removed the rate so you could see my corrections better. But if you pay close attention, you can see my corrections. Now, if I start pirouetting very, very slowly, I have to correct throughout the whole pirouette. So like I'm correcting here, like the whole time. I'm correcting the whole time. You know, and the slower I pirouette, the more I have to correct throughout the whole pirouette. That's why it's so important that you guys master all these orientations. As you can see, I'm like drifting all over the place. I suck at this. I'm by no means an F3C pilot. The faster I go, the less the corrections that I make. In other words, I start cueing on certain areas of the helicopter. So say at this kind of pirouette speed, I'm going to correct tail in and nose in. Tail in, nose in. Correction, 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 correction. And if I go really fast, then I only correct at one orientation. Say tail in. Correct, 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 correct. So only cueing on one spot. Usually my cueing spot is right here. This is where I make all my corrections. Why? I don't know. It's just, that's how I learned it, or that's how I got accustomed to doing it. I know a lot of people correct right here. There's nothing wrong. Just pick a spot. If you want to correct every time it's nose in, like here, here, then do it that way. It doesn't matter. But keep in mind, the faster you pirouette, there's no way in the world that you could actually be correcting throughout the whole pirouette at this speed. At this speed, you have to just pick one point and correct, correct, correct every revolution. You know, the slower you go, the more you can correct around the whole pirouette. So say you can cue on two angles. Say nose in, tail in, nose in, tail in, nose in, tail in. You know, and really, really slow pirouetting, then you have to start flying the machine throughout or correcting throughout the whole pirouette. So one last tip here, as you start pirouetting really, really fast, if you're going to correct on the tail side, of course, if you wait for the tail to come around and you correct, it's going to be too late. The helicopter, watch what happens. My corrections get all screwed up. I have to do it slightly ahead of that tail reaching the ideal point. So like here, 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 here. So you eventually start getting a visual for the helicopter. It takes a lot of practice. It's not something that you're going to learn like overnight. You're just going to have to do it and do it and do it and do it and do it. But you know, how fast, depending on how fast the pirouette speed is, that's what's going to determine how quickly you get on that correction. If you're cueing only on the tail, you know, it really doesn't happen when the tail is immediately towards you. It happens just a little bit ahead of it, because it takes a little nanosecond or milliseconds or whatever, tenths of a second for your brain to react and for your thumb to make the correction. So as that tail's coming around, you have to find that sweet spot. And that only comes really with practice. But that's basically how I recommend knowing that. The faster the tail, the less the corrections you make around one revolution. The slower the tail, the more the corrections you make around the one revolution. So, all right guys, I'm gonna give you a few tips on how to practice. I get all these requests all the time. People just basically telling me, well, I really try to do this and practice this a lot and I'm really not learning it. Well, I think what's happening is, you know, I see a lot of people, it takes a lot of discipline. That's the bottom line. It takes discipline to learn this stuff. And if you don't focus on what you want to learn, you're just not going to learn it. I know a lot of people that go to the field and they just go out to have fun and they hang out with their friends and they just go and start flying and they start twisting the sticks and tick-tocking and doing autos and doing forward flight and doing all this stuff. They're really not committing to the type of practice they need to do. And you know, there's nothing wrong with going out there and actually putting a few flights where you're just having fun and moving the sticks in all kinds of directions and whatever. But that's really not teaching you anything. The bottom line is, if you don't put yourself out of the comfort zone, you're not going to learn. It's just simple. You know, if you're always comfortable with what you're doing, you're not learning anything. It's like walking. If you can walk, it's muscle memory. Just walk around, that's comfortable, right? Now, if you try to walk backwards all the time, it's just kind of weird. Well, you have to do the weird things, the uncomfortable things. Put yourself completely outside your comfort zone to be able to learn. Because the more you put yourself outside the comfort zone, the more that uncomfortable zone will become comfortable zone. So just repeat things that are just not comfortable. You know, if flying from, you know, I know people that it's something as simple as, for example, doing autos. I know people that can't do an auto from left to right. I know people that cannot do an auto from right to left. So they always do it from this side or that side. If you commit yourself to trying to do those autos or trying to do whatever that maneuver is that you are not comfortable doing in that particular orientation, and you do it and do it and do it, I guarantee you within a matter of just a few tries, it's going to get better and better and better. And over time, it's just going to be just as comfortable as doing it from the other side. It's going to be no difference at all. So that's one thing. Put yourself outside your comfort zone. Now, how do you do that without crashing? That's the hard part. Obviously, practice in the simulator. I know a lot of people, again, that say, well, I can do these maneuvers in the simulator. I could piro flip an inch off the ground. This is not true. Don't fool yourselves. Simulators can make you believe that you can do certain things when you really can't. In the simulator, you can make mistakes, you can skip certain inputs and catch the helicopter at certain angles and still save it, because the power to weight ratio is not usually realistic, because, you know, it's a perfect environment, the tail works right, the cyclic works right. The real world is different. Things don't work quite exactly the same. So when you practice in the simulator, and you can make reference to our simulator episode, try to spice up the simulator environment, like put some wind and change the wind angles, and try to practice that in the simulator. Once you can do it and you know for a fact, don't lie to yourself, just think about it. Am I comfortable enough to go and do this outside? If you say yes to that, then when you go outside, do it up high. So you have 2 or 3 mistake highs, sort of, I don't know, buffer in case you make a mistake. But again, you have to do it, and you have to do it consistently, and do it time and time and time again until it becomes a comfortable thing to do. So when you go to the field, let's say that you're practicing on this Learning 3D sequence. Let's say that you're in the Piro Flips chapter, and you're at the point where you already mastered the pirouetting, and you're at the point where you kind of feel very comfortable with the half Piro Flips, and you're now starting to Piro Flip. When you go to the field, focus on the Piro Flip. Like, so for example, say that you fly twice a week, and say that every time you go out to the field to fly, you fly 6 times, for example. Think about how many times you fly. If it's 6 times, then use at least minimum 2, maybe 3 flights for that type of practice. So I would go to the field and I would fly 3 times and do nothing but piro flips for those 3 flights, nothing more. Then I would land, and then the other 3 flights, just do whatever you want to do. Fly forward, have fun, do whatever you normally do when you go to the field and you want to enjoy yourself. But make sure that at least half the time you're at the field, you're actually practicing something that you need to practice to move forward. You know, if I go to the field and I spend all 6 flights just flying around and doing the stuff I'm comfortable with, and maybe doing a couple of TikToks out of control, and maybe doing a little backwards flying to the point where I have to bail out, and then I call it a day, that's not going to teach me anything. Try to find that routine where you're actually pushing yourself to learn, and you have to discipline to move forward. Once you've mastered those piro flips, then move on to the next chapter and do the same thing. When you go to the field, fly out of your 6 flights, fly 3 flights where you do nothing but serious practice. The entire fuel tank or the entire battery pack, you should be doing nothing other than just that practice. And then you're done. Then you can just enjoy yourself and do whatever you want to do. Finally, the last tip, as you fly and you go to the field and you do these flights, make sure that you don't overdo it. In other words, you can fly 50 times a day. There's nothing wrong with that. But I found, and I can share this with a lot of other pilots, Bobby himself, and even Nick Maxwell and I had this conversation before. If you fly more than about 4 flights where you're actually trying something that you're not very comfortable with, you reach the point where your brain, your mind is just not, you're really not learning anything else. Make sure that when you're really trying to put yourself outside the comfort zone, do it only for about 4 flights. That's the most that you'll actually do well with. And you'll notice that the next time you come to the field, even though like by the 4th flight you feel like you're not progressing, when you come back to the field the next time, you're gonna be like, oh, this is much better. You need that sort of rest time. Your brain needs a little bit of time off, and then come back to it, and you'll see that you'll make huge progress. But you have to, like I said, stick to it. You have to be out of your comfort zone, and you have to have some sort of plan and the discipline to get it done. All right, that's it for chapter number 12, the last chapter of Learning 3D. Thanks you guys for watching this. I hope this was useful. I hope you can go back and practice each one of these chapters and build up on the foundations needed to move on to the next one, and hopefully you can do everything that was outlined on all of them. What we're going to do next for next month is we're going to have a new series. We don't know yet what it's going to be called, but we're going to be focusing on individual maneuvers for 3D. We're going to cover some of the stuff that we didn't talk about specifically on the Learning 3D series, things that range anything from beginner maneuvers to very, very advanced maneuvers. And hopefully you guys will enjoy that series as well. So until then, see you guys later.